Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hope everybody joined. So let me just give me a minute. Let me quickly prepare something in the background. Okay. So before going to that, right? So everybody had a look at what is cloud workflows and how they will work. All these things. I mean, anybody got a chance to go back to our session and or else looking at the documentation, you do get a understanding on what is actually the workflow, how to deploy a simple workflow, something like that. How many of you at least went through the documentation after our session?
I just went through the outlines of the document.
Okay, okay. Any others?
I just created the workflow on just one.
Okay, okay, fine. Good to hear that. Today, we will go a little bit deeper into cloud workflows. And I have brought a real time use case for you. So, I mean, which I'm currently developing in my project, right? So, that is a very, very important use case in real time, how to build a workflow pipeline, right? So that I've taken it on a high level, but inbuilt it's a very huge uh, data pipeline for our project. We're almost we're almost having around 1,000 to 2,000 steps are there in the complete workflow. So for you to understand, I have made it down to simple steps. Okay, so I have prepared that use case. I have deployed it yesterday, and I was able to successfully run that entire pipeline. Okay, so now before going to that, let's recap what is workflow, right? So workflow is a serverless orchestration service in GCP. Be very, very clear. Okay. So what we can do with workflow, so you can arrange your data pipeline or you can arrange your functionalities inside the data pipeline, right? So orchestration meaning arrangement. Be very, very clear. First, one task to be triggered, and then after that, second task to be triggered, and then task three should be triggered. And depending on the task three status, task four should be triggered. If the depending on the task three status, task five should be triggered. So this arrangement, the entire pipelining, we call it as pipelining. So you know how to write a data proc job, you know how to write a cloud function, but how to integrate, you know how to write a stored proc, right? So you know how to write a Python function. So how to integrate all of them and how to create the sequence or how to create the dependency between these services, right? That is where this orchestration comes into the picture. For a typical data engineer, be very, very clear. One orchestration service should be there in their resume. Otherwise, I mean, no one believe that you worked on data engineering. Be very, very clear. Okay, so that kind of a service is workflow. Okay, and we have another service in GCP called Composer. Okay, what is that? Composer. So this Composer is also a orchestration service. Okay, is also a orchestration service, and that is the open source version of, I mean, replica of open source tool called Airflow. Okay, so we have a tool called Airflow. So let me quickly share my screen. Okay, so in GCP, we have one more orchestration service, which is actually Composer. Okay, so this Composer is a little bit costly compared to workflows. Okay, this composer is little bit costly compared to workflows. So let me quickly show you that service as well. So here if you see control, I don't know whether free version have that access. Yeah, here. So this composer is a very costliest orchestration service in GCP. Okay, and it comes with Airflow. Okay, so Airflow is a open, I mean, on-prem actually orchestration tool which is for big data. Okay, so this Airflow basically, this is the Airflow. This is a open source on-prem orchestration tool for big data engineering. Okay, so what they have done, they have taken this Airflow open source template and they integrated this with Composer. Okay, so in the Composer service, so that is where when we say Composer, it is internally Airflow. Okay, so but I don't want to go into that service. The reason being, the Composer is more costliest service or for orchestration. We can have a very lightweight bare minimum, less cost service for orchestration, because we already spent money on data processing, data storage, right? But we don't want to spend money again for orchestration also, right? So that is where majority of the projects are moving from Composer to workflows. So they launched Composer first initially, and people started using Composer. But later on, Composer is more costly. That's what people observed, and then Google came up with a lightweight orchestration service called Workflows. Okay, so that is something that you need to understand, the difference between Composer and uh, Workflows. Okay, so now fine. So now in our previous session we have seen how to create a simple workflow, right? uh, this is target must be symbolic. So just give me a minute. Guys, I'm just facing some issues. 1 minute, guys. Okay, so 1 second, guys. I'm just facing some problem in deploying this workflow. Just give me a couple of minutes. I'll fix that and I'll come back to you guys. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I fixed it. Let me quickly share my screen. So okay. Yeah. So, in our previous session, we have seen how to call the cloud function, how to create the workflow, from workflow, how to assign the variables, right? So, how to create the cloud function, we have seen that, right? So, today we will go a little bit deeper into the workflows, guys. So, you are going to experience the real time workflow implementation today, okay? So, it is a chain between cloud function, Dataproc, and BigQuery. Okay, so we will be integrating three services into our workflow, and we'll be creating a pipeline for deployment. Right. So I have created it, and I will try to explain step by step. Okay. So let's quickly go through the YAML file. This is very important, guys. When you're working with workflows, you need to understand your YAML file. Okay, you need to understand your YAML file. So now let us quickly our YAML file so that we will get clear understanding. Okay, so project underscore use case underscore workflow dot yaml. Okay, so I'm just saving it. Okay, so this is your YAML file. Okay, so this is the complete YAML file for our use case. Now let us quickly understand step by step what is there in this YAML file. Okay, now it started with main. Okay, and we have params, which is actually the input. Okay, and steps. So we know in workflow we have steps. So each and every task that you want to perform, it is a step. Okay, so now the first step is get message. Okay, so now in here, what you are doing, you are assigning two variables. One is table name and run date. Okay, so two variables you are assigning. So in workflow, Workflow is also a kind of a Python programming language. You will be having work, you will be having variables, you will be having lists, you can iterate, right? So everything you can do. So that is why I have shared the documentation to you in our previous session. So you can see how to implement loops, how to implement lists, all these things there you'll find. Here, if you see, I have assigned two variables, table name and run date, right? And I'm in the next step. What is my next step? Get GCS raw path. Okay, this is the next step. Okay, and here we are using call functionality of the workflow. So call functionality in our previous session we have discussed. So why we use call functionality? Call functionality we use to hit the REST API endpoints. For example, if we want to call any API endpoint, API meaning a URL, okay, and get the result of that URL response, then we can use call functionality. So here, if you see call http.post, so we are doing a post call, and the args is the method that we want to pass along with the call function. Okay, so in the args, what we are passing? We are passing our cloud function URL, right? And in the body section, what we are doing? We are passing table name and run date, right? So table name we are passing, we are getting it from the variable, and run date we are getting it from the variable. And this is how we will call variable value in the workflow, dollar of variable name. So you can it will fetch the variable value for that variable. Okay, these things we have seen in our previous session, right? So how to call the cloud function, right? So this step, at this step, what your workflow will do, it will go and hit this URL with these parameters, input parameters. Okay, so then what will happen? Your cloud function will start executing by taking these two parameters, right? So let us quickly understand what is there in our cloud function first, right? So cloud function. So here, if you see, you are calling this cloud function URL, right? So when you click on this cloud function that is already created, and if you see the URL here, this is the URL that we passed. Okay, this is the URL that we passed. So you need to understand your any of your GCP service can be called via REST APIs. Be very, very clear. Even if it is a PubSub or BigQuery or Dataproc, anything you can call them from API call. Okay, it is not like every time you will go to Dataproc and then open cluster, create command. No, that is only for your development process. But in deployment, it should be dynamic, right? So in that scenario, we'll use this orchestration tool, and from the orchestration tool, we'll do the REST API call for our functionality. That is pretty clear, right? So here, if you see, I have my cloud function URL here. Okay, and if you go to source, you can see the cloud function code that I have. What is that code? I have taken the request, HTTP request, and from the request, I am getting my run date and table name. Okay, see here, this is just a request JSON, right? So because you are doing the HTTP call from your workflow, okay, and you're sending these two inputs in the request JSON, right? So it's a HTTP request, and you are sending two inputs, table name and run date. So what you're in your cloud function, you need to fetch those inputs, right? So that's why you need to use this request dot get JSON, so that it will become a JSON format, and you'll extract request JSON of run date, right? It is a dictionary, right? So you can extract by using the key, so that you will get the run date, and the table name also you will get. And if you're not passing anything, then it will return, it will run date will be no run date. Okay, then you are preparing your raw GCS path. So what is your raw GCS path? So this is your table name and run date. So this is your raw GCS path, and you are returning it from the cloud function. Okay, this is a simple cloud function which will take the HTTP request and process that request and give the response. That's the job of this cloud function. Okay, so and we have already seen the trigger for this cloud function is HTTP, not PubSub. Okay, so once we have this cloud function got created, so it will do the post call with these details, and cloud function will return something, right? So that result you are storing it into this variable cloud function response. See here, result is the keyword in the workflow, and you are assigning that result of this particular step to a variable called cloud function response. That is the meaning for this. Okay. Then, so okay, we call the cloud function in this step, and we assign that result to a variable called cloud function response. Okay. Now the third step, get GCS raw path. See here. So your response also is a JSON. Okay. Your cloud function response variable is also a JSON, right? And in the JSON, it is not only the path that you have, you'll be having timestamp, you'll be having some other extra metadata also. But the returned variable will be stored in a key called body. Okay. So that is the key that you need to extract from the cloud function response. Okay. For example, if you're returning, your cloud function is returning something, right? Your cloud function is returning something, and you assigned that entire response to a variable, right? So you assign that entire result of this cloud function call to a variable called cloud function response, right? So it is not only the returned value, you will get all the metadata. What is the cloud function, and what is the timestamp that it called? What is the interval it took? So all the metadata also it will come. So it will return. So because it's a response, right? So end of the day, it's a JSON. But where is my returned value? Your returned value will be tagged to a key called body. Okay. So that is why we are extracting only that path, the returned path from the cloud function response variable dot body. Okay. So this is how you will extract the JSON from the JSON variable. You will extract keybase, right? So this is how you will do in the workflow. Okay. So now I got my raw path, and I assigned the value to the raw path variable. Okay. Now in this GCS raw path step, it will assign the value to the raw path variable. And then the next step, so I need a job ID for entire pipeline, right? So here, if you see, I have my job ID variable, and I'm hard coding it for now, but in real time it will be dynamic, right? Dynamic, guys. Okay. So here my job ID is GW pipeline job hyphen sales data. So this is my job ID. Okay. Now it will assign this static variable, and then it will proceed for the next step. So what is our next step? Check cluster exist. Okay, now I got the path, right? So now I got the GCS path where my files are there. So the next step would be, I want to read all those files into Dataproc, and I want to process them, and I want to load the data into BigQuery. That is my next step. Okay. And I have written the wheel file, I have the logic, I have everything, right? So we already know how to build, develop, deploy the Dataproc application, right? So the next step would be submitting. I mean, the processing job should be triggered. Okay, now I got the GCS path. Now the processing job should be triggered. So now the processing job trigger is depending on the cluster, correct or not? So the cluster is very important for us before triggering the processing job. So we need to check whether there is a cluster already exists, or do we need to create a new cluster? That is the first condition that you need to check if you're working with Dataproc, right? So here, if you see, check cluster exist. So this is a step where actually what I'm trying to do, see here, http.get. So I'm getting the response from the URL called this one. So observe this URL, guys. https dataproc.googleapis.com/v1/projects devde training slash regions US hyphen west 1 slash clusters. So this is the API URL or endpoint to fetch all the clusters available in your Dataproc service in your project. Be very, very clear. Okay. Now, what it will do, it will go and hit this URL, and this URL will return all the clusters that are available. Okay. And here, if you see, you are passing a query and you are passing a filter also, the cluster name filter. So I have a cluster name. Okay. I want to submit my jobs only to that cluster, not to other clusters. Okay. So in that case, I have to have my own cluster name, right? So I'm just checking whether my cluster is already available or not. See here, my cluster name is job hyphen cluster. Okay. I'm filtering all the records here. Okay. And here, if you see the authentication mechanism, right? So you need to understand this part. When you're calling your REST API, you need authorization also. So it needs to be authorized, right? So here, the default authorization, because both services are in the same project, and your workflow will start using your service account, because that service account we used when creating the workflow, right? So that is where we are specifying OAuth2 authentication. The reason being, use the inbuilt default authentication. Okay. So you still can pass your that barrier tokens, access tokens, and all. But if it is in the same project, it is not needed. Okay, it is not needed. So majority we do integrate services between in the same project only, right? So that is where we go for the default authentication. Okay. Now here in the check cluster exist step, what it will do, it will go and do a REST API call to this URL, which will give all the clusters from my project, and then I am filtering my cluster. Okay. And I am storing the result into cluster info. That's it. Okay. I'm storing my result into cluster info. That's it. This step ends. Okay. Then what I'm doing, I'm handling my cluster condition, right? So whether my cluster is there or not. So here, if you see, your cluster info is also a response, right? And the value will be available in the body, we know, right? The required value. So we are just checking the length of that body. And if it is equals to 0 means there is no cluster of type job cluster, of name job cluster, right? So in that scenario, I want to create cluster. And if there is already a cluster, I will just try to check the status of it. Okay. So you need to understand this switch condition very carefully. So the before step is cluster exist step, meaning we are just going and hitting the URL and fetching our cluster related information and storing it into cluster info variable. Okay. And then that response, from that response, we are taking the body and we are checking the condition. Okay. Whether my job cluster is present in the response or not. If my job cluster is present in the response, then go and execute check cluster status. Okay. If my job cluster doesn't exist in the response of cluster info, then go and create new cluster. So these two are different steps. Okay. So here, if you are specifying, if this condition satisfies, next execute this step. If this condition satisfies, next execute this step. That's it. Right. So now what needs to be done, let us understand. If there is no job cluster exist in the response, okay, then we need to go and create cluster, right? So what is there in the create cluster step? So here, if you see, it is very simple, guys. We know how to create a Dataproc cluster, right, from the gcloud command. All the configurations try to recollect same configurations, we just pass it from the YAML. That's it. So here, Again, the REST API call to this same clusters URL and the same authorization and body. If you see, you have dev de training is the project ID, cluster name, and these are pretty much case sensitive variables, guys, because this API call will be happening with this request. Okay, this will prepare the JSON in the background and it will hit this URL with this body, so that your URL will give the response in the similar fashion. Okay, so now you have the project ID, devd, training, cluster name, job cluster. In the config section, you just try to give GCE cluster config is one parent tag. Under the tag zone URL, US West 1A service account you will give, and master config is one more parent in the config section. And here you will give num instances. That means how many masters you need. Machine type URI. So this is a variable. E2 standard 2. Disk config, boot disk size. We know, right? 50 GB we have given. And worker config, num instances 2. Machine type is E2 standard 2. Disk config 50 GB, right? In the software config section, we will give image version and optional components as Jupyter, okay? And config bucket dev de training default and endpoint config. See here, enable HTTP port access true, right? So these are some things that you need to know. The same configurations that we have done, right? So from the gcloud command, we are just putting them in the form of a YAML file. That's it. Okay, to do the REST API call. Okay. Now in this step, what it will do, it will take all this body and it will hit this URL. When it hits the URL, what will happen? Your data proc will start responding to the workflow and the it will create the cluster for you. Okay, automatically it will start creating the cluster for you. Okay, so now if you see our data proc have a cluster called job cluster. I'm just deleting this cluster for now. Okay, so then let's come back to the YAML file. Okay, this is the create cluster step. Okay, now if the condition doesn't satisfy, that means if the condition satisfies, that means the job cluster is already there, then check cluster status. So this is the next step, right? So in this step, what we're doing, we're again doing the REST API call, same thing. Okay, and the authorization is same, and the result cluster status. So we will get the status of our cluster. See here, clusters slash job hyphen cluster. So we have given the cluster name now. Okay, you can dynamically pass this cluster name also. That is also recommended. Okay, so in the check cluster status step, what we are doing, we are doing the REST API call to this link or URL, and we are getting the response in the cluster status. Okay, again another step called handle cluster status. Just give me a minute, guys. Just give me a minute. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Got some important call. Okay, fine. So here, if you see handle cluster status, this is again another step. In this step, what we are doing, we are checking the status of the cluster, whether it's a running or errored out. So that status we are just checking. Okay. So even you can check the stopped status also. If your status is stopped, you can start the cluster. So that condition also you can add it here. So here, if you see, based on the status, we are routing our flow, right? So the create cluster, check cluster status, and we are assigning that result to the create cluster variable, and then body status state. So this is how you will extract the state of the cluster. And if the state is running, then straight away go and submit my job. The next step is submit job. The state is error, then failure state, right? And then the next is wait cluster ready, right? So if this all these conditions are not satisfied, then wait cluster ready. So what is this step? This step is actually when you hit the create cluster, it will take some time, right, to create the cluster. So this step is for that. So it will wait for the cluster to come up, right? So again, here, if it will go to in the wait cluster ready, what we are doing, we are simply calling the previous steps, right? So check cluster status again, and then store the variable, and then it will keep on go and into the loop. Okay, so it's a loop, right? So observe these three steps, guys. So it will check the cluster status, and if the status is running, then it will submit the job. Okay, if the status is error, then it will go to failure state. Okay, if not these two conditions, then it will go for wait cluster ready. That means it is in the processing stage, I mean pending state, right? So it has to wait till the cluster is running, right? Then what we're doing, we're just calling this step. So where we are calling again the check cluster status. So it will go back and then check the status till it comes to running state. It will continuously loop, right? So it will continuously loop. So that is how it will go. So once the cluster came up and get the status as running, then it will submit the job. So in the submit job again, so this is the next step. So what we have in the submit job, just observe, it's again the REST API call and authorization, and then body, if you see the job tag and the placement tag. So in the placement tag, you have to specify your cluster name and PySpark job. It is a PySpark job. Your data proc should understand which type of job it is. You can submit Hadoop MapReduce job also, right? You can submit some other big job, Hive job also. So it's a PySpark job. That's a notation that it needs to understand. And remember, these tags are case sensitive. Okay, these tags and variable names inside this body are case sensitive. Okay. Now inside the PySpark job tag, what you need to do, you need to specify main Python file URI and Python file URI and arguments to your job and any external jar files that you need to pass. These are the three major things that you need to pass to your PySpark job, correct? So when we are deploying our Dataproc application, we used our main.py file, we used our wheel file, and we passed some arguments to our Dataproc job, correct or not, guys? So do not forget things. So I will try to. So we have already seen how to deploy a Dataproc application, right? So build and deploy commands. So here, if you see Dataproc job submit PySpark job and the main file and to which cluster I want to submit this job and where is my wheel file and then jars and then arguments. So everything you have passed here, right? When deploying, similarly you will pass it here to the workflow. So workflow also should understand your uh, pipeline, right? Or Dataproc application, right? Where is my, yeah. So Similar fashion, you will also specify here, hey, workflow, I have placed my main.py file in this GCS path, and I have placed my wheel file in this GCS path. Okay. And my wheel file will take two arguments. Those are these two. Okay. And the jar files, the external jar files we need are this BigQuery integration jar. Okay. And this is there in this path. Okay, so you will specify all these things into the submit job step, so that your URL, when it post the request, it will take this body and then it will post it. So immediately it will go submit. So here you need to understand the URLs, guys. So every URL is changing, the API is changing, right? So when we want to check the cluster status, we pass the cluster name in the URL. And when we want to submit the job, we are just using jobs colon submit URL. Okay, so regions project and then jobs colon submit. So once it triggers that URL, it will pass this job body. So then immediately your job will be submitted to the cluster. Okay, then again job results. Okay, so we need to fetch the status of the job also, right? Whether it's failed or whether it's successfully run, all these things. Same thing what we have done for the looping thing, right? So handle clusters is similar thing. So we assign the result of the job page to the job results variable, and we are handling that in the status step, where it will go and hit the jobs page and give the job ID, and then it will extract the status and store it in a variable. And depending on the status, we are actually controlling our flow, right? If the status is pending, or if the status is running of the job status is running, then we will wait till the job complete. If the status is done, then we will go to success state. If the status is error, then we will go to failure state. So this is how you will control your job status, right? Same thing, guys, with the simple conditions and with simple API calls, you are arranging your entire pipeline, correct or not? So in the success state, what you are doing, you're just assigning the final status as success, and then you're deleting the cluster. Okay, and then in the failure state also same, you're assigning the failure status message, and then you're deleting the cluster. Okay, in the wait job complete, it's same again, it's a loop, right? So check job status, it will go to check job status, and then it will again check the status, and then it will store the results, and then again it will come to handle job status, right? So this is something that you need to understand. It's a loop, and how we are actually defining the steps. And then the next step, what needs to be executed, the delete cluster step, right? In the delete cluster, again, it's a API call. If you see in the scopes, we're just defining it, and then in the URL, you're just http.delete you're calling, and then you're giving your cluster URL, clusters slash. Here you can hard code your cluster name, or you can get it dynamically from the cluster create cluster result that we already have that response, right? So we can get it from there also. Okay, so this is how you handle your entire data proc thing, guys. Okay, so similarly, as soon as my data proc job completes, right? So I want to call my BigQuery stored proc. I want to call my BigQuery stored proc. So here, if you see, what I'm trying to do here. So I'm again utilizing the REST API calls. Okay, I'm again utilizing the REST API calls of the BigQuery. Okay, and then I'm sending this body. What is the body? So dev.de training, the project ID and the job ID and the configuration tab. What we are passing? We are passing the query, right? So what is our query? You may pass any SQL, or you may pass you can call your stored proc also. So I'm just calling my stored proc, that's it, right? So this is the, you are assigning the job results to the uh, big BQ job result uh, variable. Okay, simple guys. So this is, I mean, it looks like very complex, but if you go in depth and if you go understand line by line, it is very simple. Okay, you just need to find out the right tags. You will definitely get the right tags from the internet or any. So you just type how to submit, how to create a data proc job from the Google Cloud Workflow. So you will get a complete step also. You can pretty well use your chat GPTs or Copilot to help you out with workflow steps, right? But the logic should be there in your brain. Okay, so I need to check the cluster status. You can go and give the prompt to the Copilot how to check the cluster status uh, from the workflow, Google Cloud Workflows. It will give you the step. Okay, it will give you the step. Similarly, you can ask anything, right? How to create the cluster data workflow. So you it will give you the step. Okay, it will give you the YAML step. Simple things, guys. You need to have that flow in your brain. That's it. You have a lot of sources to help you out. Okay, but the main flow should be there in your brain. Okay, I need to call the cloud function. I need to store that variable, and then I need to pass that variable to the data proc job, and then I need to check the cluster status. Okay, according to the cluster status, I want to submit my job. If my job failed, then I want to get notified. If my job got successfully completed, then I want to call the BigQuery storage prop. So this flow you should have. Okay, otherwise it is impossible. You cannot even. No one in the world cannot help you. You should know your sequence of steps that needs to be run or that needs to be developed. Then only any source can help you. If you don't have anything in your brain and if you want simply to build workflow, no, it is impossible, guys. Be very, very clear. Okay, so simply this is how we have developed our workflow, and simply we can deploy it. So now I deployed that workflow already. So here if you see, um, I'm just trying to recreate it again for you guys. So here, if you see, I'm creating this workflow and workflow service account I'm giving and the name I have given. Okay. And here, if you see the trigger, right, it's a pub sub trigger. That means how my workflow will be triggered. My workflow will be triggered from a pub sub message. Okay. So whenever there is a message that comes to the test topic, okay, so here the topic also you can see, right? Test topic name is test. So immediately our workflow will be triggered. Remember, immediately our workflow will be triggered. So this is my entire code. You can see the visual representation also. Start, get message, get GCS drops, stepwise execution flow. You can get more understanding when you see this visualization. Handle cluster condition. So depending on the conditions, how your flow is going on. So if condition 1 satisfies, it will go to create cluster. If condition 2 satisfies, it will go to check cluster status. So you need to understand this, guys. Okay, you need to understand this visual representation also. It is very important. But focus should be there on the YAML. If you give the YAML, it will give the visual representation. Okay. So that is how your pipeline is going. So now simply let's deploy it, right? So I just deployed my workflow here. Okay, and these are all previous executions. You can see all the executions history, right? These are all my previous executions. Okay, so now the trigger is pub sub message. See here, I have my console ready. I'm just pushing my pub sub message. Okay, I'm just pushing my pub sub message to the topic. So as and when I pushed, so immediately my pipeline will be triggered. See here, your workflow started already and it is running wait cluster ready step. Okay, so you can click on that execution ID and you can see all your steps. What are all the steps got successfully completed, right? So what are all the steps successfully completed and at which step it is running? It is waiting the cluster ready. That means we don't have any cluster. So it is started provisioning the cluster. So it is creating the cluster now, right? So it will wait till the cluster state comes to running. That's what our condition, right? So then it will submit our wheel file and the main file, and then the arguments it will take, and then it will submit that job to the cluster. Okay, so that is how your workflow pipeline is running, guys. So nothing, you are not doing any manual activity here. You just orchestrated your workflow, the sequence of steps, and you are just calling it. Okay, once you call it, your sequence of steps are getting executed, right? So you are seeing multiple things in this workflow, correct? You have a cloud function call, you are storing the results into variables, you are handling the conditions, and then you are handling the responses from the API calls. You're calling the data proc job, you're calling the create cluster, you're calling the delete cluster, you're also calling the store proc. A lot of things are there in this AML. If you go through this AML, that is more than enough for you guys. Okay, if you understand this AML properly, that is more than enough for your or flow learning. Few additional things that you need to do is collections, iterations. Okay, how to do looping, how to do list based looping. These things you need to do, but that looping also you are doing here. If you simply observe, we are also doing the looping here, the iteration part of it, right, with the steps itself. So that is about the integration of your data proc job, cloud function, and then BigQuery storage proc into one single workflow. Okay, guys, any questions or queries?
Yeah, it's clear, but at last, while you call that BigQuery stored procedure, right? I see there is hard coded value. Can you just go to that one? Like the
Uh,
notepad.
yes. So
So,
fine. Okay. So
yeah,
here,
those
right?
Vihan,
So I
Vihan.
have given you a template. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how you can call a BigQuery stored proc from the workflow? It's just a hard-coded template. You can create the dependencies from your project use case. Meaning, let us take an example. Even for the data proc, also there is no dependency on the cloud function. So I have just uh, called my data proc job. That's it. So here the arguments are nowhere related from the cloud function results. Okay, so this is just a template, guys. You need to modify it according to the project use case that we are going to discuss tomorrow. Okay, so how to call a BigQuery stored proc, by seeing this template. How to call a data proc job, by seeing this template. But in tomorrow's session, we will be discussing the real-time end-to-end project use case. So in that project use case, you have to create the dependency. Okay, meaning you need to extract the cloud function results and pass it to the data proc job as an argument. And then once the data proc job got completed, you will extract the table name and then call the respective stored proc from the BigQuery, so that your merge statements or your incremental queries will be executed automatically, which will refresh the target tables. So this is a sequence that you need to create. Okay, but this is a template which will help you to achieve that. Okay, you got it, Sai?
Yeah, yeah, got it.
Fine. So let's go back and check the status of the cluster. Yeah, it came to running immediately. Our workflow also should go further. So let's come back and refresh it. So here, if you see, it is now submitted, and then it is waiting for the job to complete, right? So you can go and go to jobs page and monitor your job. So your job ID you have given, right? So that is the pipeline sales data. So this is related to sales data. So you can see the logs here for your job. Okay. Okay. See here, your logs are getting populated. And this is the application that we have built using that PyCharm project wheel file. We have developed a project based data proc application, right? So that application wheel file. I have just submitted it. Okay. So fine. So it is waiting for our job to complete. So it failed at, see here, it failed. Your workflow got failed at delete cluster step. Okay. So now let us quickly debug it. So why it got failed. Okay. So you can check the reason. So this is also important, guys. You should be able to identify the logs. I hope it failed in the right time only. Okay, how to debug a failure, right? So whenever your workflow got failed, you will see this kind of a notation at which step it got failed. So your workflow execution got failed at delete cluster step. Okay. So now if you click on this execution ID, it will open that step and you can go to logs. Okay. You can go to logs, and in logs section, you will see the error line, right? Just uh, click on this tray and then go to JSON payload. Okay. And then here failure, right? So click on this failure. So here you will see the uh, error message. Okay. So what it is trying to say, so it is trying to say that your cluster name was not found, meaning in the delete cluster we are giving some other cluster name. Okay. So let us quickly go back and then edit. Next. And let's I may take 10 more minutes, guys. Please cooperate. Okay, because this is very important. So now the delete cluster, where is this one, right? So here if you see the clusters slash body cluster name, so this is I mean this is not coming properly. Okay, so I will simply hard code the cluster name for now. Okay, I will simply hard code the cluster name. So what is our cluster name? Our cluster name is, check cluster status, where is it? Yeah, job hyphen cluster. So that request, that response body is not giving proper results, guys. So I mean we need to validate it properly and then pass it dynamically. So delete clusters slash job hyphen cluster. Okay, that's it. So now I'm just trying to redeploy. Okay, this is how you will fix the YAML and redeploy the workflow. Okay, so now it should, as my cluster is already there. See, I already have a cluster. I already have a cluster. Okay, so my cluster is already there, so it should not go and create the cluster again. It will automatically submit the cluster. And remember, you should remove your job ID from here in the jobs page. Every time when you are submitting for the same job, you should remove it. Okay, or else you can create a dynamic job ID based on the timestamp or something, and you can submit it. Two options. Okay, so in real time we'll create the dynamic job ID. Okay, we'll create the dynamic job ID on the fly and then we will submit it. Okay, so now let us, we will definitely see that also, but for now we will try to uh, see the simple one. The complex things we will see later. So I've just re-triggered it. So now if you see, it will wait job complete. Directly it came, it did not went to create cluster command because your cluster state is already running, right? So you know we have the condition there. So your cluster state is already there running, and if your cluster status is running, then straight away the next step is submit job only, right? So that is how your workflow is flowing. So you now the job is submitted and it is waiting. See, check job status. It see all the steps it is trying to and then it is wait again. See, it is keep on going into that loop, and then it is checking the status, right? Again, it got failed in the return value function. Okay, return value step. Now let's see why it got failed. So this is how you need to debug and fix things, guys. Okay, because it's a very very big YAML file. We may do some kind of a syntactical mistakes, or we may do type error, unsupported operand types for plus colons str and dict expecting numbers or strings. Okay, okay. So the problem with this is I got the root cause for it. So let us click on this, or else let's, oh, not execute again. So let's come back and edit this workflow. Okay, so now let's go to next and then go to return or result, right? So return result. So here what we are doing, we are combining the status of the work data proc job and the BigQuery stored proc. But BigQuery stored proc result is a variable, right? Sorry, it's a response, right? It's a JSON, and you're trying to concatenate that JSON with the string value. So it is not, it is impossible, right? So that is why we just need to specify the body part of it. That's it. Okay. So okay, so what if the body is also a dictionary? Okay, so for now, so you need to see the result, and then accordingly you need to place the values, guys. But for now I am just saying bq call completed. Okay, I'm just trying to deploy it again, or else I will try to, maybe this is the problem. Deploy. Okay, now it got deployed. Again, I'm just triggering my workflow. Same, I'm just publishing the message to the topic, so it will automatically start. So see here, wait cluster ready. So and then immediately it will go, and then it will try to, because it is already deleted, right, your class. Okay, so I need to delete this job ID also. And the clusters, because we deleted the cluster, I think. So that is the reason it is trying to create the cluster, because it passed the delete cluster step, right? So fine, it's okay, guys. So this is how you will deploy your workflow. Okay. So I will try to run it, and I will try to make it successful, and I will try to upload it in the Git repository. Okay. So I request everyone to go over this YAML file, okay, and create your own cloud functions, create your own data proc applications and BigQuery stored procs, and try to deploy it by your own. Use this template and create your own workflow application. Okay, if you are ready by tomorrow, then you will be able to understand the use case, the end-to-end use case of the project. Tomorrow's project use case will be very straightforward. If you don't execute it, it will be very complex for you to understand, guys. Okay, it will be very complex for you to understand. Okay, fine. So that's all I have for today, guys. Any questions or queries, you can ask.
So if the job got failed, so the only way is to rerun it, right? Not to continue.
Sai, your voice is breaking. Come again.
Sorry, if the job got failed, the only way is to correct the things and rerun it by cleaning up the already performed things, right? Let's say if we are loading 10 tables from source to destination while running the
Mhm.
job, if only half of the job is done, like 5 tables were loaded, and some for some reason if it got failed,
Mhm.
so we'll look at the code and we'll correct it, and we have to write some logic for excluding the already loaded file, then rerun it. So is that how?
Yeah, basically
Yeah.
there will be a control table, right, Sai, where you
Yeah.
will store the status of the table
Oh,
load,
yeah.
everything. You will store the status, right? So
Yeah.
what you will do, you will put a cloud function to fetch table status. Okay.
Okay.
If the table status is failed, then only rerun. If the table status is succeeded, then simply skip. So that you will get the
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions? Come on, guys, ask questions if you have any confusions. Okay. So I will try to make it successful, and I will try to upload it in the uh, Git repository. Okay. Then I'll post that status in the group. So request everybody to go over it and then try to implement your own workflow pipeline. Okay. So that you will completely get it. Okay. And once you get it, tomorrow will be the conclusion session for our session. Okay, complete classes. So we will be discussing the end to end project architecture, solution architecture. Okay. And once we discussed that, you have to develop that POC by keeping that solution architecture in mind. You have to develop the POC by using all the tech stack that you have learned till now. Okay, so that is the goal, and I'll give you a 2 weeks time for implementing this entire project. Okay, after 2 weeks we will connect back and I'll review all your projects. Okay, it's a kind of a project, mini project implementation, guys. Okay, so if you do this, you will get the complete confidence on data engineering. Okay, GCP data engineering especially. Okay, fine. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining. We'll connect back tomorrow.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks.